Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to bring attention to an urgent and heartbreaking issue: the dire conditions in Táchira Women's Prison in Venezuela. This facility, originally meant to rehabilitate and protect inmates, has instead become a place of suffering, extreme overcrowding, and lawlessness. It is a prison where survival is a daily battle, and the basic rights of women are stripped away. One of the most alarming issues in Táchira Women's Prison is extreme overcrowding, a problem that has turned the facility into a nightmare for its inmates. Originally designed to house a limited number of prisoners, the facility now holds far beyond its capacity, forcing women into inhumane living conditions. Cells meant for a few individuals are packed with dozens, leaving no room for personal space or dignity. Many inmates are left with no choice but to sleep on the cold, dirty floors or in makeshift hammocks made from torn clothing. The lack of proper bedding increases health risks, as prisoners are exposed to extreme temperatures, insect infestations, and the spread of disease. The limited availability of toilets and showers means that basic sanitation is nearly impossible. Women must wait in long lines just to use the restroom, and in some cases, they are forced to relieve themselves in buckets due to the lack of working facilities. The overcrowding also worsens food shortages. The prison is unable to provide enough meals for all inmates, and what little food is available is often spoiled, lacking in nutrients, or insufficient to sustain an adult woman. Malnutrition and dehydration are common, further weakening the health of the prisoners. Inmates must often rely on food sent by family members, but those without outside support are left to suffer. Another consequence of overcrowding is the rise in violence and exploitation. With too many inmates crammed into small spaces, tensions run high, leading to frequent fights and assaults. The lack of supervision from authorities means that these conflicts often go unchecked, leaving women vulnerable to physical and psychological abuse. In some cases, powerful inmates or gang leaders take control of resources, distributing food and necessities only to those who obey them, creating a hierarchy of suffering and privilege. Medical care is almost non-existent in the prison, and overcrowding only makes this problem worse. With so many inmates falling ill due to poor nutrition, unsanitary conditions, and stress, the limited healthcare services cannot keep up. Pregnant women, those with chronic illnesses, and individuals suffering from infections are often left untreated, resulting in severe complications and even death. The extreme overcrowding at Táchira Women's Prison is a humanitarian crisis that cannot be ignored. It turns what is supposed to be a correctional facility into a place of pure survival, where human rights are disregarded and suffering is the norm. Without immediate intervention, the conditions will only continue to deteriorate, putting the lives of countless women at risk. The living conditions in Táchira Women's Prison are nothing short of horrific, with extreme unsanitary conditions posing a constant threat to the health and dignity of its inmates. The prison lacks even the most basic facilities necessary for hygiene, making daily life a struggle for survival. These conditions are not just an inconvenience. They are a direct violation of human rights and a significant contributor to disease, malnutrition, and suffering among the women imprisoned there. One of the most pressing issues is the lack of access to clean water. Many days, there is little to no running water, making it impossible for inmates to bathe, wash their hands, or clean their surroundings. This leads to a buildup of filth, creating a breeding ground for bacteria and viruses. Drinking water is also scarce, and inmates are often forced to consume dirty, contaminated water, leading to widespread cases of stomach infections, dehydration, and other serious illnesses. The prison's toilets and sewage systems are in a constant state of dysfunction. Many of the toilets are either broken or overflowing due to the excessive number of inmates using them. With so many women packed into the facility, access to restrooms is severely limited, forcing some to resort to unsanitary alternatives like using plastic bags or buckets. This further contributes to the foul smell that lingers in the air, making the already unbearable conditions even worse. Without proper sanitation, Infectious diseases spread rapidly throughout the prison. Skin infections, respiratory diseases, and gastrointestinal illnesses are common. With no proper medical treatment available, inmates are left to suffer in agony, often relying on home remedies or help from fellow prisoners. The absence of soap, disinfectants, and cleaning supplies means that keeping personal and communal spaces clean is nearly impossible, making it even easier for illnesses to take hold and spread unchecked. Another major issue is the lack of access to menstrual hygiene products. Many of the women in the prison do not receive sanitary pads or tampons, forcing them to use rags, newspaper, or other unsafe materials to manage their menstrual cycles. Without proper disposal options, these makeshift hygiene products pile up, further contributing to the unsanitary environment. The inability to manage menstruation safely and hygienically not only affects physical health, but also deeply impacts the dignity and mental well-being of the inmates. The presence of vermin, including rats, cockroaches, and lice, adds another layer of misery. The prison's lack of cleaning and pest control measures means that these pests thrive in the overcrowded and unclean environment. Inmates report waking up with bites from bedbugs and rodents, which can lead to infections and additional health complications. The lack of proper ventilation makes the prison hot, humid, and filled with the stench of rotting food, human waste, and decay. The combination of poor sanitation, lack of hygiene products, and a general disregard for inmates' well-being has turned Táchira Women's Prison into a breeding ground for disease and suffering. The women held there are not just serving sentences. They are being subjected to conditions that actively destroy their health, dignity, and chances of rehabilitation. One of the most disturbing realities of Táchira Women's Prison is that it is not run by prison officials or law enforcement, but by powerful inmate-controlled gangs. These gangs have taken over the prison, creating a parallel system of governance where violence, extortion, and fear dominate daily life. Instead of a structured correctional facility aimed at rehabilitation, the prison has become a lawless environment where the strongest and most ruthless inmates control everything from food distribution to security. These gangs operate like organized criminal enterprises, maintaining strict hierarchies and enforcing their own rules. New inmates are immediately introduced to this brutal system upon arrival. They are often forced to pay for protection in the form of money, food, or even personal belongings. Those who cannot afford to pay are left defenseless, often becoming victims of violence, forced labor, or sexual exploitation. One of the key ways these gangs maintain control is through extortion. Prisoners with outside family support are pressured to demand money from their relatives, which is then handed over to gang leaders inside the prison. Those who refuse to comply face severe consequences, including beatings, starvation, or being isolated from essential resources. This system of extortion extends even to basic necessities like water, hygiene products, and sleeping spaces. Inmates who do not have gang connections or the means to pay bribes are forced to survive in the worst conditions, sleeping on the floor and struggling to get even a basic meal. Violence is an everyday reality in this prison, and the gangs enforce their authority through brutal means. Armed with makeshift weapons, knives, clubs, and even firearms smuggled in through corrupt channels, gang leaders and their followers do not hesitate to use force against anyone who challenges them. Fights break out regularly, and in many cases, these violent incidents go completely unpunished because prison authorities either fear the gangs or are complicit in their operations. Murders, assaults, and physical punishments are carried out without interference from guards, who either turn a blind eye or are too under-resourced to intervene. Another horrifying aspect of gang control is the sexual exploitation that many women face within the prison walls. Some gangs force weaker inmates into servitude, requiring them to perform degrading tasks or engage in exploitative relationships in exchange for protection or basic resources. The lack of law enforcement inside the prison means that victims of sexual violence have nowhere to turn for help, further perpetuating a cycle of abuse and silence. Drug trafficking is also rampant within the prison, facilitated by the very gangs that run the facility. Inmates who are addicted to drugs are often used as pawns, forced into selling contraband or working for the gangs in exchange for their next fix. The presence of narcotics not only exacerbates the violence, but also creates a deep divide between those under the influence and those trying to survive in an already hostile environment. With the Venezuelan prison system suffering from corruption and neglect, authorities have largely abandoned any attempt to regain control of Táchira women's prison. Many prison guards and officials are either bribed or too afraid to challenge the gangs, allowing them to operate with complete impunity. As a result, the prison has become a self-contained criminal empire, where justice is determined not by the law but by the whims of the most powerful inmates. Corruption and inequality are deeply embedded in the operations of Táchira women's prison, shaping every aspect of life behind its walls. In a place where resources are already scarce, corruption allows those with money or influence to secure better conditions while others are left to suffer. This unequal system not only exacerbates the misery of the prison's most vulnerable inmates, but also strengthens the control of criminal organizations within the facility. One of the most glaring examples of corruption in the prison is the role of prison officials and guards. Instead of enforcing the law and maintaining order, many of them are complicit in the illegal activities that thrive inside the prison. Guards regularly accept bribes from inmates who can afford to pay, granting them privileges such as better food, access to medical care, or even private sleeping quarters. Those who have no money or connections are forced to endure the overcrowded, unsanitary, and violent conditions without any hope of relief. This corrupt system extends to the way contraband enters the prison. Despite the supposed security measures, everything from cell phones and weapons to illegal drugs is smuggled in with the help of prison staff. Gang leaders, who have the most financial power, use these illicit goods to maintain control over other inmates, further deepening the divide between the privileged and the powerless. Those who can afford to pay for protection, drugs, or better living conditions continue to live with relative comfort, while those who cannot are left to fend for themselves in horrific circumstances. Food and medical supplies are also distributed based on corruption and favoritism. While all inmates are supposed to receive basic meals, the reality is that those with money or influence can buy extra food, leaving others to go hungry. Malnutrition is rampant among the poorest inmates, while wealthier prisoners, often in league with the gang leaders or prison staff, receive larger portions and better quality meals. This divide is particularly cruel because many of the inmates come from backgrounds of poverty and marginalization, and their suffering is only intensified within the prison. Medical care follows the same corrupt pattern. There are few doctors or medical supplies available, and getting access to treatment often depends on bribes or gang affiliations. Inmates who fall seriously ill must either pay for medicine or risk being ignored entirely. Pregnant women, elderly inmates, and those with chronic illnesses are among the most affected, as they struggle to receive the health care they desperately need. The lack of fair access to medical attention means that preventable diseases and infections can quickly become life-threatening conditions. Another major consequence of corruption in the prison is the presence of an internal economy controlled by powerful inmates. Those with financial resources can buy better clothing, personal hygiene products, and even beds, while the poorest inmates have to rely on what little they are given, often nothing at all. The prison has essentially become a market where survival is determined by wealth, reinforcing the inequality that exists both inside and outside of its walls. Even legal proceedings and early release programs are tainted by corruption. Some inmates manage to secure early release or reduced sentences by paying off officials, while others, who might have committed lesser offenses but lack financial resources, remain locked up for years in appalling conditions. This further demonstrates that justice within the Venezuelan prison system is not based on law but on money and influence. The overwhelming corruption within Táchira women's prison ensures that it does not function as a place of rehabilitation, but as a system where power and privilege dictate survival. Those who enter without money connections, or gang affiliations are often left with no options, subjected to the worst aspects of the prison's brutality, while those who can afford to manipulate the system continue to thrive. The deprivation of basic necessities in Táchira women's prison is one of the most inhumane aspects of life behind its walls. The prison fails to provide inmates with essential resources such as food, clean water, proper clothing, and hygiene products, forcing women to survive in degrading and unhealthy conditions. The lack of these fundamental needs does not just make life miserable, it actively endangers the health and dignity of every prisoner. One of the most critical shortages in the prison is food. The meals provided by the prison authorities are barely enough to sustain an adult woman. Inmates often receive small portions of poorly prepared food, which is sometimes moldy, undercooked, or entirely inedible. There are days when some prisoners do not receive any food at all due to corruption, mismanagement, or gang control over food distribution. Malnutrition is widespread, leading to extreme weight loss, weakness, and vulnerability to illness. Those who have no family to send them extra food suffer the most, as they have no way to supplement their diet. Water scarcity is another life-threatening issue. Access to clean drinking water is extremely limited, and inmates are frequently forced to drink contaminated water, which leads to infections, stomach illnesses, and dehydration. The lack of running water also makes it nearly impossible for inmates to maintain hygiene, worsening the already unsanitary conditions of the prison. Showers and toilets are shared by hundreds of women, many of which are broken, overflowing, or completely unusable. Without water for bathing, inmates go weeks without being able to properly clean themselves, increasing the risk of skin infections, lice infestations, and other hygiene-related diseases. Hygiene products, including soap, shampoo, toothpaste, and toilet paper, are almost non-existent within the prison. Women must find ways to manage without these basic items, often resorting to using dirty rags or scraps of paper in place of toilet paper. This is particularly devastating for menstruating women, who are denied access to sanitary pads or tampons. Many are forced to use old cloths, newspapers, or even nothing at all, which increases the risk of infections and adds to their humiliation and discomfort. The lack of menstrual hygiene products not only impacts their physical health, but also their mental well-being, as they are stripped of the ability to manage their periods with dignity. Clothing is another scarce resource. Many inmates wear the same set of clothes for months without being able to wash them properly. New clothes, underwear, and shoes are rarely provided, leaving women to wear torn, dirty, and worn-out garments. Those who do not receive outside help from family members are left to rely on hand-me-downs from other prisoners, which are often unclean and ill-fitting. During cold weather, the lack of adequate clothing and blankets makes conditions even more unbearable, with inmates shivering through the night in overcrowded and poorly ventilated cells. Medical supplies are just as limited as food, water, and hygiene products. There are few medications available, and those who fall ill must often endure their sickness without any treatment. Simple infections can quickly become life-threatening conditions due to the absence of antibiotics or proper medical care. Pregnant women receive little to no prenatal care, and many are forced to give birth in unhygienic conditions without the assistance of trained medical professionals. Even those suffering from chronic conditions such as diabetes or high blood pressure are often left without their required medications, putting their lives at constant risk. The failure to provide these basic necessities turns everyday life in Táchira women's prison into a struggle for survival. The women inside are not just enduring a sentence for their crimes. They are being systematically deprived of their dignity, health, and even their right to live in conditions that meet the most minimal standards of human decency. The conditions inside Táchira women's prison are not just inhumane. They are a direct violation of fundamental human rights. The prison system in Venezuela has long been criticized for its neglect, corruption, and abuse, but Táchira women's prison stands out as a particularly horrific example of how incarcerated individuals, especially women, are subjected to systematic mistreatment and deprivation. The inmates are denied their most basic rights, including access to food, healthcare, safety, and humane living conditions, turning their imprisonment into a prolonged act of cruelty rather than a system of justice or rehabilitation. One of the most glaring human rights violations in Táchira women's prison is the treatment of prisoners as less than human. The extreme overcrowding, unsanitary conditions, and lack of food and medical care strip inmates of their dignity and create an environment where suffering is constant. International human rights organizations, such as the United Nations and Amnesty International, have set clear standards for the humane treatment of prisoners, yet every one of these standards is being ignored within this facility. Women are forced to live in conditions that are not fit for animals, let alone human beings. Physical and psychological abuse is rampant. Inmate-controlled gangs rule the prison through intimidation and violence. But instead of stopping these abuses, prison authorities either ignore them or actively participate. Beatings, sexual violence, and extortion are daily realities for many inmates. Women who do not comply with the demands of gang leaders or corrupt guards are often brutalized, and there is no legal recourse for them to seek justice. Those who dare to report abuse often face retaliation, making it impossible for victims to speak out without fear of further harm. Torture is also a major concern. There have been reports of prisoners being subjected to extreme punishments, including starvation, prolonged solitary confinement, and physical beatings. Some inmates are denied food and water for extended periods as a form of discipline, while others are left in overcrowded cells where the temperature becomes unbearable. Psychological torture is just as prevalent, with inmates being threatened, humiliated, and degraded on a regular basis. The constant stress and fear create severe mental health issues, yet there is no access to psychological support or counseling. Another significant human rights violation is the lack of proper medical care. According to international laws, prisoners have the right to receive medical attention when needed, but in Táchira women's prison, this right is non-existent. Women suffering from infections, chronic illnesses, or injuries receive little to no treatment, often leading to preventable deaths. Pregnant inmates are forced to endure their pregnancies without prenatal care, putting both their lives and the lives of their unborn children at risk. Many give birth in filthy conditions, with no medical personnel present to assist them, leading to dangerous and sometimes fatal complications. Sexual violence and exploitation are also major concerns. Female inmates, particularly those without financial resources or family support, are often forced into sexual slavery by gangs or even corrupt prison staff. Those who resist face severe beatings or are denied basic necessities such as food and water. The lack of legal oversight and the complete absence of accountability mean that these crimes go unpunished, leaving victims trapped in a cycle of abuse with no way to escape. The right to legal representation and fair treatment is another right that is routinely ignored. Many women inside Táchira women's prison have been detained for years without a proper trial, and some are imprisoned under questionable charges. The Venezuelan legal system is plagued by corruption, and prisoners without money or political connections often find themselves stuck in a bureaucratic nightmare with no hope of justice. Some inmates have completed their sentences but remain incarcerated because their paperwork has been lost or ignored by authorities. This lack of due process means that many innocent or wrongly convicted individuals are suffering needlessly. The situation inside Táchira women's prison is a clear violation of international human rights standards. Every day, these women are subjected to cruel, degrading, and life-threatening conditions that strip them of their dignity and basic freedoms. The prison is not a place of rehabilitation or justice. It is a living hell where human suffering is ignored, and where the most vulnerable are left to endure unimaginable horrors. One of the most critical issues in Táchira women's prison is the complete lack of government oversight and the systemic neglect that has allowed the facility to deteriorate into one of the most dangerous and inhumane prisons in Venezuela. The authorities responsible for maintaining order, ensuring human rights, and providing basic necessities have all but abandoned their duties, leaving the prison to operate in a state of lawlessness. This neglect has not only worsened the conditions inside, but has also allowed powerful gangs to take over, creating an environment where inmates are left to fend for themselves with little hope of intervention or justice. The Venezuelan government has long been criticized for its mismanagement of the prison system, and Táchira Women's Prison is a prime example of its failures. Despite international human rights organizations highlighting the dire conditions inside, there has been little to no response from government officials. Promises of prison reforms have either been ignored or implemented in a superficial manner, failing to address the core issues of overcrowding, corruption, and lack of resources. Instead of taking action, authorities have chosen to turn a blind eye, effectively abandoning the women inside to endure horrifying conditions without any hope for change. One of the most significant consequences of this neglect is the unchecked power of inmate-controlled gangs. In a properly managed prison, security personnel and law enforcement officials would oversee daily operations, ensuring that prisoners are safe and that the facility runs according to the law. However, in Táchira Women's Prison, guards and prison administrators have lost, or willingly given up, control, allowing gangs to establish their own rules and hierarchies. These criminal organizations dictate everything from food distribution to access to medical care, creating a system where survival depends on bribery, connections, and submission to gang leaders. The absence of government oversight has made it impossible for vulnerable inmates to receive protection or fair treatment, leaving them at the mercy of violent criminals. Corruption among prison officials further exacerbates the neglect. Many guards and administrators accept bribes in exchange for allowing contraband to enter the prison, granting special privileges to wealthier inmates, or turning a blind eye to acts of violence and exploitation. Instead of working to improve conditions, these officials profit from the suffering of the inmates, deepening the divide between those who can afford to pay for better treatment and those who cannot. This corruption ensures that even if complaints are made or reports of abuse surface, nothing is done to address them because the very individuals responsible for oversight are complicit in maintaining the status quo. Another major aspect of government neglect is the lack of funding and resources allocated to the prison. The budget for food, medical care, and maintenance is either insufficient or mismanaged, leading to widespread shortages of essential supplies. Basic necessities such as clean drinking water, soap, toilet paper, and sanitary products are rarely provided, forcing inmates to rely on their families or illegal prison economies to obtain them. Many prisoners come from impoverished backgrounds, meaning they have no external support system, leaving them in a perpetual state of deprivation. The government's failure to allocate resources effectively has directly contributed to the deteriorating conditions and suffering of the women inside. The legal system also plays a role in the ongoing neglect. Many inmates in Táchira Women's Prison have been detained for years without trial due to a backlog of cases, a lack of competent legal representation, and a corrupt judicial process. Some prisoners have already served their sentences, but remain behind bars because their paperwork has been lost or ignored. The slow and inefficient legal system means that women who should have been released long ago continue to languish in horrific conditions, unable to regain their freedom because of bureaucratic failures. The absence of any government initiative to improve the legal process or expedite cases further demonstrates the systemic disregard for the well-being of incarcerated individuals. Despite reports from human rights organizations, testimonies from former prisoners, and widespread media coverage exposing the appalling conditions in Táchira Women's Prison, the Venezuelan government has consistently failed to take meaningful action. Instead of acknowledging the crisis and working towards reforms, officials often deny or downplay the severity of the problem, attempting to suppress information rather than addressing the underlying issues. This deliberate inaction allows the cycle of abuse, corruption, and suffering to continue unchecked, making it clear that the prison is not just a place of punishment, but a space of forgotten human lives, abandoned by the very authorities that are supposed to protect them. The horrifying conditions inside Táchira Women's Prison are not just the result of overcrowding or poor infrastructure. They are a consequence of deliberate neglect, corruption, and a complete failure of the justice system. The prison, rather than serving as a place of rehabilitation, has become a living nightmare where violence, exploitation, and suffering are the norm. Women who enter its gates are stripped not only of their freedom but also of their dignity, forced to endure extreme deprivation with no hope of relief. Addressing these issues requires immediate action from both the Venezuelan government and international human rights organizations. Prison reform must be prioritized to ensure that inmates are treated with basic human dignity, provided with adequate food, medical care, and protection from violence. Corruption within the prison system must be eradicated, and those responsible for the inhumane treatment of prisoners should be held accountable. The women inside Táchira Women's Prison are not just statistics. They are mothers, daughters, and individuals who deserve to be treated as human beings. Ignoring their plight is a failure of justice and humanity. If no action is taken, the prison will continue to be a place of suffering and death, an enduring stain on the human rights record of Venezuela. It is time for the world to recognize their suffering and demand change before more lives are lost to a system that has abandoned them.